Hello there, duelists. Care to join me in the Valley of the Kings to explore one of Yu-Gi-Oh's oldest archetypes? As today we have Gravekeepers on the playmat. Released in 2002, which makes them almost as old as the Pharaohs themselves, Gravekeepers have had sprinklings of support since their release, with the latest wave in 2019 giving them a fusion. So grab your Explorer hat and archaeological tools and let's see if we can unearth some plays. Okay, so the Gravekeepers first. We've got 3 Commandant, discard it, add a Necrovalley. We really want to see Necrovalley, it's a condition for a lot of our card activations, so he's absolutely crucial. He's also not bad in terms of the synergy with like as a level 4 and stuff like that, so he's got utility. We're running 3 Gravekeepers Recruiter. I have considered cutting this down a bit. I think the main thing is it's just quite slow in today's game. So Recruiter, if it's sent to the graveyard, you can add a Gravekeeper monster with 1500 or less defense from your deck to your hand, which is all of the Gravekeeper's monsters in this current build. He's also level 3, which is a bit of a pain in the neck because a lot of the cards are level 4 and level 3 is just, there's not really a lot of utility with that. We're running 3 Gravekeeper Spiritualist, which is kind of I suppose our main card now. So while Necrovalley is on the field, you can fusion summon with Gravekeeper monsters from your hand or side of the field. Again, it's like if it was just like from the graveyard or something like that, it'd be absolutely amazing. Then unaffected by Necrovalley, stuff like that. But this card you want to see because it gives you access to your main kind of linear play. From there, running 3 Gravekeepers Headman, and I've seen this cut down to less than 3. I just feel like there's not that many monsters that I actually want to play in Gravekeepers, besides the fact they've got loads of monsters, which is a bit sad, kind of like that Hero or Blackwind kind of thing where they've got a million monsters but not that many of them are playable. So you can, if it's summoned, you can target a level 4 Gravekeeper monster in your graveyard and special summon it in attack or face down event position. It's unaffected by Necrovalley, obviously, because otherwise it'd be unusable. Again, light Recruiter, level 3, kind of really lets it down, because otherwise you can, go for like a rank 4 Exceed play with it and stuff like that. But, it is what it is. And then finally, I'm playing the 1 Descendant, kind of like as that, tribute to destroy a card, kind of utility and problem solving. Okay, so onto the spells and traps. Probably should have separated those up actually because this section's quite large, in fact the largest section in the build. So we've got 3 Necrovalley. This is like the cornerstone, the key card of the Gravekeeper's deck. A lot of our cards rely on this card being on the field. Gravekeepers gain 500, which is a fair wedge, makes quite a lot of them, sizable. And then any card that would be moved from the graveyard cannot be moved apart from if it's itself. Which is more relevant in kind of modern Yu-Gi-Oh than it ever was when the card first came out, and obviously it has waves of being more relevant than not. We've got 3 Necrovalley Throne, which is kind of our search card. I almost always use it for its search effect, so you can add a Gravekeeper monster from your deck to your hand, and then you can also normal summon immediately after it resolves, which you can use one or the other, so it tends to be the search that you're using, but the other one has fair utility. I'm running 3 Royal Tribute. I've seen some things cut this. I think it's just kind of like, I suppose, the traditional way of playing Gravekeeper sort of thing, and that's why I'm not running any hand traps, which you could argue is for better or for worse. So while you control Necrovalley, both players discard any monsters in their hands, which can, completely eliminate some decks, as monsters tend to be fairly heavy in terms of the ratios in decks, and then while Necrovalley is on the field they can't move those cards, so it tends to be, it can just be a blowout sometimes. And then 3 Hidden Temples of Necrovalley. So this stops special summoning apart from Gravekeepers, but you've got to have a Gravekeeper monster and Necrovalley on the field, otherwise this card gets destroyed. Obviously it's a really decent floodgate and also searchable via some of the other cards in the deck. But yeah, the condition of activation and keeping it on the board is a bit savage. From there, I'm playing 1 final Gravekeeper's kind of spell and trap, which is Gravekeeper Stele. So target 2 monsters in your graveyard, so 2 Gravekeeper monsters in your graveyard, and add those back to your hand, and it's unaffected by Necrovalley. So yeah, it's a fairly decent way of keeping resource. What I would say is, it's still a bit slow, and I wouldn't question anyone who'd cut this from the build entirely. From there, we're playing 3 Pot of Extravagance. We just need cards. You could up to pay, you know, Prosperity, but again, I think you kind of have to more cards than specific cards. There's a lot of ways of getting into Necrovalley. You know, you've got 3 Necrovalley Terraforming, which obviously I'm running, and then 3 Commandant, and then the 3 Thrones. So you've got like 10 cards to get to Necrovalley. So I think that's not so specific, whereas, you know, you need more cards than your opponent really to win, because you're just grinding out the win that way. And from there, I'm playing 2 Forbidden Chalice and 2 Book of Moon, and these are kind of my replacements for my hand traps because I don't want them to get royal tributed. So Chalice obviously, you know, negate an effect and gains 400, and Book of Moon flips it down. So these are useful going, you know, kind of going first because you can set them, or going second because you can kind of bait out the negates. Again, I think you could swap them out for, you know, for Forbidden Droplets and, you know, triple tax talents and stuff like that. So these are all options, but I think I don't have those yet, so we're waiting on those megatons for those. From there, I'm playing 1 Call by the Grave and 1 Terraforming. So Terraforming is obvious, and the Call by the Grave. This deck actually suffers quite a bit with hand traps. You know, if your Spiritualist gets negated, it can be a bit of a doozy. So yeah, you definitely want to try and avoid that. And then we're running 3 Solemn Judgments to kind of protect our back line and, you know, get a bit of disruption on board. And then 2 Imperial Tombs of Necrovalley. So this, very similar to Temples, needs Gravekeeper and Necrovalley on the field. So the activation requirements are quite stringent, but you can negate a spell, trap, or monster effect, which is pretty solid. Again, it's just that. It's just that activation requirement. It's also once per turn. I mean, come on, like, you know, Solemn Judgment's not a once per turn. Why is Imperial Tombs? It's, you know, it's I think it's frustrating that some of the cards have such a high activation requirement. Okay, and onto the extra deck. Again, take this with a pinch of salt. It's an extravagance extra deck, so it's not too thought out. I've put in a few options and a few texts that you might want to use. Obviously, you can choose to, you know, use others should you wish. So running 3 Gravekeeper Supernaturalist. So this is kind of what we want to get to, you know, kind of as soon as possible. He gains attack equal to the levels of the monsters times 100, so that's normally going to be 7, so he'll be a 2/7 from that, and then 500 from Gravekeeper, from Necrovalley, should I say. So he'll be about 3/2 normally, which is pretty big. It could be bigger, but yeah, pretty big. And then while Necrovalley's on the field, he can't be destroyed by card effects, and neither can any field spells. So not bad protection. Again, you know, stuff like Cosmic Cyclone's obviously going to ruin your day, but you know, what you're going to do about that? Well, hopefully there's Judgment and Imperial Tombs for that scenario. And then during the end phase, you can add a Gravekeeper's or Necrovalley card from your deck to your hand. And again, it was one of those things where why the end phase? You know, we've got a slow deck, and you've chosen to put the effect of a card that would be, you know, really good. You know, searching like Imperial Tombs during your turn, then setting out something like that would be amazing. But you've chosen to put it on the end phase, which makes it completely unusable. It's a shame because I think the potential is, you know, is kind of there. From there, we're running a few XYZs. Again, these rarely come up, especially because you're kind of running a multitude of level 3s and level 4s. So running Tornado Dragon, Plan B and Giant Hand. I think Plan B probably comes up most. Tornado Dragon's occasional and Giant Hand almost never. But yeah, I think if you've got 2 level, you know, kind of 2 level 4s and your opponent's biting at you, then Plan B can work. I'm running 1 Daybreaker. So, you know, if he gains multiple tokens, you can, or multiple counters, should I say, you can pop a card on the field. He gains counters whenever a spellcaster is special summoned to his only points to. So, you know, it's an option. From there, I'm running a massive Knightmare package of 3 Cerberus, 3 Phoenix, and 1 Unicorn. So these just kind of deal with problems. Link 3 is a bit of a stretch to get to, but it is possible. You know, Phoenix and Unicorn are normally the cards that we're kind of going to. And then finally, the 1 Selene. So you can end up, you know, special summoning a, you know, Gravekeeper monsters from the graveyard, assuming that you don't have Necrovalley on the field. It's kind of like, again, a backup plan, but I wouldn't argue with anyone, you know, if they were to mix up these ratios. I would love to be able to say that an almost 20-year-old archetype stood the test of time. But unfortunately, Gravekeepers haven't aged quite as gracefully as the tombs they protect. Being a control deck that isn't resilient to hand traps is not a great start. but the conditions of some of the activation requirements and the deck's overall speed really seals the sarcophagus, if you catch my drift. So it's a heavy-hearted 1 for relevance. As for fun factor, I don't think the deck has too much going for it either. It's a control deck with limited options, so unlike something like Eldritch or Subterra, you've really not got many ways to deal with what your opponent throws at you. So, again, sadly, it's a 2 for fun. You will find enjoyment when you kind of get your linear play going, but, you know, I think it's a struggle. It's a struggle. I think all of the above criticism would be okay, you know, if this was a casual budget strategy. The real fundamental issue that I have with Gravekeepers is that some of the cards are really expensive, kind of hard to find. I've estimated this build at $270 from TCG Player, which you could probably cut it down, but it's a lot. You've really got to love Gravekeepers, or do you have the cards in order to, you know, for this to get my recommendation? So, I'd leave Gravekeepers in the sands of time, forgotten. Am I right? Let me know, and thanks for watching.